And we are live. Go ahead, Liz.
Thank you. We shall call the meeting to order. We respectfully acknowledge that the County of Haliburton is located on Treaty 20 Mishi-Saugig territory and in the traditional territory of the Mishi-Saugig and Chippewa nations, collectively known as the Williams Treaties First Nations. We acknowledge a shared presence of Indigenous nations throughout the area and recognize its original inhabitants as the stewards of its lands and waters since time immemorial. Good evening and welcome to the County of Haliburton's Land Division Committee. My name is Liz Danielson and I'll be your chairperson for tonight's hearing. I'd like to introduce you to the other members of the committee. Tammy McKelvey, Councillor at Large for Minden Hills. Pat Kennedy, Public Member for Dysart et al. Bob Snyder, Public Member representing Highlands East. And Bill Donald, Public Member representing Algonquin Highlands. We are joined by our Director of Planning, Steve Stone, our official Land Division Secretary Treasurer, Alana Lacey, and Planner Adam Kozlowski. This meeting is held through remote electronic participation in accordance with the Municipal Act 2001 as amended. The purpose of the hearing is to give each applicant or their authorized agent the opportunity to discuss their application with the committee and to respond to written submissions which may have been received. It's also an opportunity for committee members to broaden their understanding of each application by asking questions. Members of the public who are participating virtually today may also make oral submissions to the committee, whether in support or opposition to an application. We hear the applications in the same order as they were received in our office. Our Secretary Treasurer will introduce each application. Our planners will provide planning briefs. Then participants who have registered to address the committee will be admitted virtually to speak to the committee, and each participant will be provided 5 minutes to speak. With that, we'll now proceed with the agenda for the evening. Is there any declaration of conflict of interest? Hearing none, could I have a mover and a seconder to approve the agenda as presented? Members Kennedy and Snyder.
Be it resolved that the August 14th, 2023 Land Division Committee agenda be hereby approved.
All in favor? That's carried. And could I have a mover and a seconder to approve the minutes for the Land Division meeting held July the 10th this year? Mover and a seconder, please. Member McKelvey, Member Kennedy.
Be it resolved that the minutes of the Land Division Committee meeting held July 10th, 2023 be approved and printed and circulated.
All in favor? That's carried. So we'll move into our applications for consent. The first being a Longworth for a lot addition in Highlands East.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good evening, committee. First application is H02023, which is Longworth, and the Longworths are the owners of the granting lands at on County Road 507, and the Cleggs are the benefiting landowners, and they're at 8089. Sorry, that's got that reversed. The Cleggs own vacant land. 8089 is the address of the granting property. I'll just share a screen and walk committee briefly through the application. So by way of background, the property back here outlined in red is currently owned by the Longworths. And in 2007, give or take, the Cleggs they constructed a hunt cabin back here. And the Cleggs own this property here, which is outlined in blue. It has frontage on County Road 507. And basically it was discovered by Highlands East Building Department, and that building did not have a permit. And so now they have to go through the process. However, because the building is not on the Clegg's actual property, we have this boundary adjustment before committee tonight. So the total area is 1.35 acres. It's outlined in red. It'll be added to the benefiting lands owned by Clegg. And as a result, the benefiting lands will no longer be vacant. They will contain that dwelling. It was built as a hunt camp, but because it has a kitchen and facilities, it's considered a dwelling for zoning purposes. So Highlands East has endorsed the application subject to a number of conditions to deal with that dwelling. And county staff have no objection, subject to the conditions that are in the staff report, and I'd be happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Do the committee members have any questions about the application? Member Snyder.
Thank you. I think the report noted that there were no public comments made. Have any been received since the report was written?
Through you, Madam Chair, no correspondence was received on this one.
Okay, thank you.
And we have no one presenting this, representing any yays or nays on this application?
There is no one to speak to this application tonight.
Okay. Well, if there are no further questions, could I have a mover and a seconder to grant provisional approval on the application? Members Kennedy and Donald.
Be it resolved that the Land Division Committee of the County of Haliburton receive the report related to application for consent H-02023 Longworth, and that the Land Division Committee for the County of Haliburton grant provisional approval of application for consent H-02023 Longworth, subject to the conditions outlined in the staff report. Member McKelvey.
For.
Thank you. Member Snyder.
Yay.
Member Kennedy.
Yes.
Member Donald.
Yes.
Chair Danielson.
Yes.
Thank you. That is carried.
Thank you. The next application is from Gilligan for a lot addition on Scotch Line Road in Minden Hills.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Application H-02123 is for Gilligan, and the property is 1649 Scotch Line Road. And it's a boundary adjustment involving a larger acreage, which is going to be conveyed from one property to another. No new lots are being created, and I'll just open a sketch briefly. So the current property configuration is as seen on the screen here. So 1649 is this large property. It's just under 95 acres. And there's a house and a unused vacant livestock barn and some outbuildings down in the southwest corner. And 1079 is the benefiting lands, and it has a dwelling, various livestock facilities, and detached garage and other outbuildings. So what this application will do is convey everything that's seen here in red to that property here on Bingham Road, and the retained lands will be on Scotch Line where the house and the unused barn are currently in green. So no new lots will be created. Basically just it's a rural land swap between these two properties. No correspondence was received, and staff have reviewed the application. It's been endorsed by Minden Hills, and staff have no objection, subject to the conditions that are outlined in the staff report, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Do members of the committee have any questions on this application? Seeing none, just to double check, or is there anyone who wishes to speak to the application?
No one is registered to speak to this application tonight.
Okay. Hearing no objections or questions, could I have a mover and a seconder then to grant provisional approval for this application? Members Snyder and McKelvey.
Be it resolved that the Land Division Committee of the County of Haliburton received the report related to application for consent H-02123 Gilligan, and that the Land Division Committee for the County of Haliburton grant provisional approval of application for consent H-02123 Gilligan, subject to the conditions outlined in the staff report. Member McKelvey?
Yes.
Member Snyder?
Yay.
Member Kennedy,
Yes.
Member Donald,
Yes.
and Chair Danielson.
Yay,
Thank you. That is carried.
thank you. So the next application is from Eastern Grocers for both a new lot and a right-of-way in Dysart et al. On Highland Street.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Actually, this is two applications. We've got H02223, which is we'll call it a technical severance to re-separate the properties as they once existed. And then H2323 is a right-of-way, which will provide access to the rear of the Cozy Corner restaurant building across the Shoppers Drug Mart property. And I'll just share screen very briefly. Okay, so I'll start over on the left-hand side. So this is the Cozy Corner restaurant, and the property boundaries basically go to the back of the Shoppers Drug Mart building. The building, and this is how the lot was configured. And what has happened is because Easton Grocers purchased both of these properties and they were in the same name, they've merged. And so what this application tonight will do is basically re-separate the lots as they once existed. So what's in red here will be severed, and then the retained will be the Shoppers Drug Mart property, which is in blue. The second part of the application is the rear of the Cozy Corner has a parking area, and the right-of-way application will give pedestrians and vehicles right of passage over the Shoppers property. So basically the cars can come in through the parking area, go in behind the shipping area, and then they can access the rear of the Cozy Corner property, basically across the Shoppers property. And it'll just provide that legal access that I think the users back here have historically been using, but it just wasn't enshrined in a proper right of way. So Dysart Council has endorsed the application. County staff have no objections, subject to the conditions that are in the staff report. And I'd be happy to answer any questions committee may have.
Questions from the committee? I understand that we have two people that wish to speak to the application. First, the planning agent as well as the real estate agent.
They're just being moved forward.
Okay. Good evening, Ms. Harrison. You wish to speak to the application?
Yes, through you, Madam Chair. Thank you, and good evening to the committee. Yes, I think Adam has basically gone over the application. It's fairly straightforward. I would call this a cleanup applications. We are taking, two properties that previously existed and recreating the parcel fabric and creating a legal access to the Cozy Corner so they can get deliveries, etc., as they currently do. There are two commercial uses that are doing well there, and there's no change proposed to the land uses. I'd be very happy to answer any questions the committee members may have.
Any questions from the committee members for Ms. Harrison? Okay, is Mr. Hodgson present?
Mr. Hodge, oh, sorry. He is not in attendance.
Okay. Just go ahead, Ms. Harrison.
Sorry, May through you, Madam Chair. I was notified about a half an hour ago that Mr. Hodgson was not available, otherwise engaged. And so as I said, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Well, it would appear that the committee don't have any questions and that the reports have provided all the information that we need.
Right.
So hearing no questions or concerns, could I have a mover and a seconder to then grant provisional approval for both application H2223 and H2323? Member Donald, seconded by Member Snyder.
Be it resolved that the Land Division Committee of the County of Haliburton received the report related to applications for consent H-02223, H-02323, Easton Grocers Limited, and that the Land Division Committee for the County of Haliburton grant provisional approval of application for consent H-02223, Easton Grocers Limited, subject to the conditions of approval as listed in the staff report, and that the Land Division Committee for the County of Haliburton grant provisional approval of application for consent H-02323 Easton Grocers Limited, subject to the conditions of approval as listed in the staff report. Member McKelvey?
Yes.
Member Snyder?
Yes.
Member Kennedy?
Yes.
Member Donald?
Yes.
And Chair Danielson.
Yes,
Thank you. That is carried.
thank you. The next application is by Donkervoort and McGee and Boyce for lot additions on Redstone Lake.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The application H-02723 is a lot addition from Donkervoort McGee to Boyce. And then H-2823 is a reciprocal boundary adjustment from Boyce to Donkervoort McGee. And I'll walk committee through a sketch here, just showing what's happening. And committee, I emailed you this morning with a clarification sketch that came in from Mr. McGee. So I trust everyone saw that and it made sense. Okay. So the first application we'll see lot addition, which is this kind of pie-shaped piece, triangular shaped piece down here. It will be conveyed from the Donkervoort McGee property to Boyce, and Boyce owns a large property over here to the east. And there is a small cottage on the Donkervoort property right here. And the purpose for this lot addition is really to give this cottage a bit more room and a bit more privacy once the day comes where the Boyce property is developed with the building. And I'll scroll down now to, so that's just a zoom in of that triangular piece that's going to be conveyed. And then on the other hand, the Boyce property, which is in yellow, will convey this triangular piece property to the Donkervoort McGee property over here. So the two parcels are almost identical in size. There's a little bit of a difference, but at the end of the day, they're both very large waterfront properties, and the lot area changes is almost negligible. No new lots will be created, and none of the shoreline frontage will be impacted. The only correspondence we received was from Bell, and Bell is asking for a hydro easement for the small parcel that is on the Donkervoort property being conveyed to Boyce. There's a hydro line that goes through there, and Hydro just wants to ensure that that lot addition, when it becomes part of the Boyce property, that a right-of-way exists to give hydro crews access to that line for maintenance. Sorry, Bell, to get to that line for maintenance if needed. So Dysart Council has endorsed the application. County staff have no objection, subject to the conditions in the report, and I'd be happy to answer any questions. The easement for Bell has also been added to the conditions that are before committee tonight. Thank you.
Okay, and the applicants have no issue with the easement.
Through you, Madam Chair. So I did forward the Bell correspondence back to the applicants, and they did not communicate with me either way whether they have any objection.
Questions from the committee?
Adam, where's the access to these properties?
Through you, Madam Chair. So the Boyce property is vacant. It does, I'm just going to open up the sketch here. Yeah, so the Boyce property is vacant. I don't know where the access comes in. There is a right of way that comes in off of the municipal, or the private road that comes in. The Donkavort property is considered water access on Redstone Lake. It has a water access address.
Okay, okay, thank you.
Any other questions from the committee? Is there anyone present who wishes to speak to the application?
No one is present to speak to the application.
Okay. Hearing no questions or concerns, could I have a mover and a seconder then to grant provisional approval for application for consent 2723 and provisional approval for application 2823? Member Kennedy and Member McKelvey.
Be it resolved that the Land Division Committee of the County of Haliburton received the report related to applications for consent H-02723 Donkavort and McGee and H-02823 Boyce, and that the Land Division Committee for the County of Haliburton grant provisional approval of application for consent H-02723 Donkavort Maggie, subject to the conditions of approval as listed in the staff report, and that the Land Division Committee for the County of Haliburton grant provisional approval of application for consent H-02823 Boyce, subject to the conditions of approval as listed in the staff report. Member McKelvey.
Yes.
Member Snyder.
Yes.
Member Kennedy.
Yes.
Member Donald.
Yes,
And Chair Danielson.
Yay.
Thank you. That is carried.
Thank you. The next application is by Harcourt Holdings and Ripma for cancellation of consent for a lease.
Thank you, Madam Chair, to committee. So this is a new type of application. I think it's the first one that the committee's heard, and it's certainly the first one I've done in my career for a consent cancellation. Just by very brief way of background, on January 1st, the Planning Act was amended, and we now have the option to cancel a previous consent that was granted. And in most cases, this tool will be used to allow lands to merge. So as opposed to going through other lengthier and costlier planning processes, now we can basically revoke a consent. And if the properties are in the same name, the lawyer can apply to consolidate and the lands will merge. And it's a much cleaner process and it takes much less time. Planning Act doesn't require any circulation to neighbors or any type of public notice. So it's very straightforward. Just for committee's benefit, I do require the local endorsement first, because if we're going to merge property, we want to make sure that there's no zoning issues. So for example, two lands merge, now you got two cottages, now we've got a zoning issue. So those are matters that will get flushed out during pre-consultation and resolved before, I think long before they ever appear in front of the land division, because they'll have to go through the municipality first and get endorsement. So moving on to this application, and I'll share a screen. Can everybody see the reference plan?
Yes.
Okay, thanks. So right now, Harcourt Park is a little bit unique in that in the classic sense of the term, we think of these as lots. And the way Harcourt Park is set up is that that organization basically owns the land and they create reference plans, which creates basically a lease. So when we look at these, and we'll call them property boundaries, it's actually the limits of a lease. So what happens is I could purchase a lease and lease this property and put my cottage on it for however many years, or if I choose to sell, I can sell this lease to another leasee, and then it's very similar to a lot, except it's just that Harcourt Park remains the owner of the land underneath everything. So moving forward, right now, Mr. Ripma has leases on 3, and I'll call them parcels. So we've got 1401 Straggle Lake Road, which is recently vacant. The cottage was torn down, and that's the first property here. 1409 Straggle Lake is where the main cottage and outbuildings are. And this parcel here is vacant. Half of the tile field for this cottage is on that lease holding. These lease holdings were created in 1999 through consent. And what the application today will do is cancel those 1999 consents so that Mr. Ripma will in effect, and I'll use it in quotes, merge these three lease holdings into a single lease holding. So if Mr. Ripma does decide to sell all three of these interests, the purchaser has to buy all three. They can't buy one or two, or they can't be separate, because the cancellation tonight will basically remove these two, I'll call them lot lines in the middle. For all intents and purposes, it'll be one lot, if that makes sense to committee. So for building and zoning purposes, this cottage was removed, and the consent cancellation will actually rectify some of these septic encroachments and other building encroachments that exist on the property today. So Dysart has endorsed the application and county staff endorse it. The only condition that's imposed in this case is that the solicitor prepare a certificate of cancellation for each of those descriptions. Otherwise, the Planning Act does not give us authority to put conditions on these in the similar way that we put them on other consent applications. I did have a bit of a discussion with two lawyers and another planning colleague on this who have done these, and yeah, conditions are generally, there's nothing in the legislation that gives us authority to do that. So I'd be happy to answer any questions, and I know Sue Harrison is also here if there's any questions about the mechanics of this, and I'd be happy to answer any questions. Thanks.
Member Schneider.
Thank you. So just sort of for my interest or my understanding, these lots still need to abide by the zoning bylaw. Is that correct?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
So, yeah. So through you, Madam Chair, just a committee. So when I talk to the Dysart staff, they basically treat these lease descriptions as lot lines, and therefore the building setbacks and so on have to apply.
I know when I first looked at this application, I missed the fact that the one cottage had been demolished, and I was concerned about the appearance that there were two cottages involved. Member Donald.
Adam, in your comments, you indicate that there be no new cottage development permitted as a result of this approval. Does that change at all with the changes to the official plan that we're going to review later about the secondary residence?
Through you, Madam Chair, no, because the additional residential units are not anticipated in waterfront areas where cottages are uses. Those are mainly going to be targeted for the urban areas and the villages and the rural areas. The zoning bylaw in the various townships will have permissions for guest cabins, but it's not the same as an additional residential unit. Guest cabins can't have kitchens, for example. They're just for sleeping accommodations. So yeah, the ARU policies will have no effect on this application.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions that committee members have? Any comments you'd like to add, Ms. Harrison?
Yes, for you, Madam Chair. I agree with Adam. This is all new to all of us, and it's kind of fun, but also a little hard to get your head around with the added, information that it's Harcourt Park and we have leases to deal with. So, I mean, my short story on it is, it's a happy thing for the lake. We have 3 lots and we're going down to 1, or 3 consents. And on the site visit, it's really quite an interesting property. It's the property to the west that had structures and buildings completely vacant, and the property to the east was vacant. And Mr. Ripma is putting in over 200 trees and landscaping around the sides, and these are mature trees around those 2 properties to sort of create a privacy for his own property. And in terms of just the history of why he's there, his parents own the lot to the east, which they just further to the west that his brother now owns. So I don't think the neighbors have concerns, and it's such a huge property now and so nicely done, and right down to the waterfront. But in terms of just wrapping around the approvals, I mean, how I explained it to myself and in discussions with David Shapiro, who was guiding all of us through this, he basically said, you have provincial approvals and you create consents, and that's one set of approvals. And over here you have Harcourt Park, which has private agreements, leases with these leaseholders. And so there are two separate layers of approvals. So knocking out all those consents, the leases will remain. But if Mr. Ripma, ever chose to sell his lease or convey his lease to someone else, all three would be locked into that property. So the conveyance, like he couldn't choose to just sell one lease and break it up, because it's not three properties anymore. And the other thing I would say is when Dysart got the application, they asked us to get a letter from Harcourt Park saying that they were aware of what Mr. Ripma was applying to do and that they understood what was happening under the Planning Act. And they gave us that letter, and it was included with a submission. So while it's all new and different for us to grasp, and we have the added layer of the leases, I think, Adam's covered it well, and I think it's a positive in terms of from a planning perspective that we're taking two lots off the lake.
A really interesting application, and I'm delighted to hear that somebody's actually planting mature trees as opposed to small
it's breathtaking.
Yeah. Member McKelvey, you had a question?
No, I'm fine. That was just answered during Ms. Harrison's.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Okay, could I have a mover and a seconder then to grant provisional approval to consent applications 2423, 2523, and 2623? Members Snyder and Kennedy.
Be it resolved that the Land Division Committee of the County of Haliburton received the report related to applications for consent cancellation H-02423, H-02523, H-02623 Harcourt Park Incorporated, and that the Land Division Committee for the County of Haliburton grant provisional approval of application for consent cancellation H-02423, subject to the conditions of approval as listed in the staff report, and that the Land Division Committee for the County of Haliburton grant provisional approval of application for consent cancellation H-02523, subject to the conditions of approval as listed in the staff report, and that the Land Division Committee for the County of Haliburton grant provisional approval of application for consent cancellation H-02623, subject to the conditions of approval as listed in the staff report. Member McKelvey.
Yes.
Member Snyder.
Yes.
Member Kennedy.
Yes.
Member Donald.
Yes.
Chair Danielson.
Okay,
Thank you. That is carried.
thank you. And our last application is by Shearer for another cancellation of consent in Minden Hills.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This application is actually much simpler than the last cancellation we just looked at. I'll share a screen and walk committee briefly through this one. So if committee recalls, last year, we approved two lot addition applications, and that was H3122 and H3922. And what's in front of committee here in this sketch, this kind of dark red line here, this bold red line, this was going to be a lot addition for, this is H3122. And this area here, 1160 Hawkins, was going to be added to this shoreline property here in green. The second application was 3922, and it was going to be the other half of that 1160 Hawkins, which is this irregular shaped piece. and it was going to be added to 1130 Hawkins Trail, which is this property here. What it was discovered is that this shoreline property here at 1158 and 1160 used to be one property. And what happened was in 1975, everything in red, which is basically the back bush lot area, was severed off from this lakefront property. So the severed lot was this large property here, which became 1160, and the retained lands was 1158. So in order for these lot additions approved last year to go forward and for the lands to merge, we have to cancel the consent from 1975, which will allow this piece here to merge with 1158 and allow this piece here to merge with 1130. So cancellation of consent in this case, it's technical in nature, and it's going to allow facilitation of a pair of lot additions that were already approved by committee. So staff have no objection to this cancellation. We have the one condition that a certificate be issued, and Minden Hills looked at this application. They have no concerns. So staff recommend approval, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
So will this have to come back to us again?
No.
Okay.
Once the certificate is issued to cancel that 1975 consent, lawyers can then proceed with merging those two shoreline properties with the back lot.
Approvals that we've already given. Okay, any questions from the committee? Is there anyone here who wishes to speak to this application? Or cancellation, I guess I should say.
There is nobody in attendance for this one.
Okay, hearing no concerns or questions, could I have a mover and a seconder then to grant provisional approval of the application for cancellation? Members McKelvey and seconded by Member Kennedy.
Be it resolved that the Land Division Committee of the County of Haliburton received the report related to application for consent cancellation H-03023 Shearer, and that the Land Division Committee for the County of Haliburton grant provisional approval of application for consent cancellation H-03023, subject to the conditions of approval. Member McKelvey?
Yes.
Member Snyder?
Yes.
Member Kennedy?
Yes.
Member Donald?
Yes.
And Chair Danielson.
Yes,
Thank you. That is carried.
that completes the review of the applications for consent. The next item of business are the changes to our official plan. I just wanted to comment that I found it interesting. I should have said this while Ms. Harrison was here, to discover what excites planners. So who's going to speak to this? It looks to me like Mr. Stone might.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair, to the rest of committee. So what you have before you is really the county's spin on recent provincial policy changes that would allow municipalities to include additional residential units in already established dwelling units. And the emphasis at the province is really to have more housing, affordable, hopefully, in our settlement areas. Their interest really is to focus in on fully serviced communities. That's how their policy was set up. And after some discussion with our local area planners, we decided to give the county spin on the policy direction, which was really to allow for it to be outside of our fully serviced urban areas, to include our partially serviced and unserviced settlement areas, as well as our rural areas, subject to functional servicing studies related to the additional units. So in essence, what you see before you is the basics is really a name change. Instead of second or secondary dwelling units, we're now just referring to additional residential units. So you'll see that throughout the text. As far as the county official plan, it's only section 4.4 that really deals with additional residential units. We've reached out to the province and they have actually raised up their hands and said they don't want to be involved. So it'll allow us to go quickly through the process. And we're hoping to actually have a public meeting on this in September, which stands to reason that we could actually have it approved in play sometime in late October. So that's, if you want to think about something that's exciting for planners, it's going through the provincial policy review and being out in less than 2 months. That's exciting. And the other one that we're slipping in is it's been the bugaboo for council and committee for a few years now, which is the take on the 1,000-meter buffer around our settlement areas. So Adam and I have both scratched our heads over the last couple of years that we've been here. We couldn't figure out what the authors were trying to do with that policy. And so we gave ourselves 2 years to think up of a better approach. And so that's what you're seeing in policy 3.3.7. And we took out words like shall and shall not, and that allows the committee, allows council to have more flexibility, shall we say, in terms of implementing the policy. And so what we're trying to do here with wordsmithing in this policy is really to say you're allowed to have severances in the abutting rural area, but it's only as long as they fit in terms of the type of use. So, for example, if you had an industrial area and somebody was in the rural area across the road, wanted to create a lot for a residential unit right beside the industrial area, that's not compatible. So that's the way this policy has now been reworded to work, is to allow committees such as yourself flexibility to review consents as they come up, and hopefully we'll see a few more lots created next to our settlement areas, as long as they don't have any conflicts. So like all policies, once this is approved at the county level, then it'll be cast down, shall we say, to the local levels, and their councils can take a further spin at it in terms of updating their policies to be, in the end, more permissive. So that's it. Thank you very much.
Any questions for Mr. Stone? Pat? And then Bob?
Any discussion, Steve, about the 1,000 meters, about reducing that? That's a kilometer. It's
Yeah, no, we left that alone because we thought if we could fly under the radar with this one with the words, you know, it allows us to look at a big area, but I think you'll see the policy changes are actually very permissive in the end. So,
Bob?
Thank you. With permitting a secondary dwelling on a property, do you think one of the unintended consequences will be in years down the road that we'll see applications up for consent to sever those off? And then in some cases, they may be odd shaped or undersized lots?
Good question. No, I don't think so. I think what we'll do is we'll put this policy, or at least council will put this policy in place. We'll have a better part of a year to see how it's operating. And then we anticipate at the county level anyways to go through a more comprehensive review of the entire official plan, probably in end of 2024-25. And I think what we're going to do then is really look at the consent policies and again, make them more workable policies to allow for better lot creation. So you won't get we'll have more control in the sense of creating irregular lots. But I think this policy, I don't think it's going to generate a lot of conflict with our consents right now, mainly because when you look at most of the consents are created through frontage and area. So, you know, we're pretty strong at the staff level to say if you don't have the minimum lot area, for example, in the rural area, in our case, it's 2 acres or 0.8 hectares, then you don't get your you don't get your lot recommended for approval. So
Couple of questions. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Tammy.
So you would put this out, you're hoping to put this out to a public meeting in September, and then the county would adopt it, and then it's basically just going to be rubber stamped at the provincial level, and it would be in effect fairly quickly.
no, believe it or not, the province will not actually approve this. It'll be up to the county. They get the honors of approving and implementing this policy. So that's what I reached out to the province, I guess a couple of weeks ago, and did get a response to that effect. So once it's approved by or adopted by county council, it becomes in effect, and then the local area municipalities, their councils can consider policy changes to their official plans.
Imagine the province doing that.
They're empowering us. That's great.
Yeah. A couple of questions, and this may be lower tier questions, but I think you might have the answer to them. When it comes to additional residential units, would tiny houses be considered? Or are we dealing with strictly the minimum square footage requirements that each municipality sets?
Well, that's a very good question. So what we've seen around the province is enabling policies and regulations, and I stress the word regulations, at the zoning bylaw level. So where the townships have the zoning regulations, they've been adding definitions to what a tiny house is, and stipulating what the minimum lot size would be, frontage. But the most critical thing is whether or not they'll be stating what the minimum size of a dwelling unit will be. I know when we were dealing with tiny houses in Sequin Township, we restricted tiny houses to be about 350 square feet. And the reason being is we also allowed for fairly good size sleeping cabins. And so what we wanted to make sure is that we got a maximum size on our sleeping cabins and a minimum size to our tiny homes, if you want to call it. But the tiny homes were just slightly bigger than the sleeping cabins, so we could differentiate between their use in a settlement area or out in the rural area, but not in the shoreline or waterfront areas. So
I know that Algonquin Highlands reduced their minimum square footage requirement from just over 600 square feet to 400, I believe, and that's sort of trying to help in that regard. Not exactly a tiny house, but pretty close.
Yeah.
And the other question is whether or not residential units are going to be allowed on commercial properties. And I understand that most municipalities do allow that as long as they're auxiliary units based on the business. But I'm wondering if the allowance for additional residences would also be something that a business could consider. I just keep hearing that there's so many places that are having problems with staffing because staffing can't find housing, and how that might work.
Well, I don't think you'll see that sort of gain some traction here with this policy change. But to your point about hearing things, certainly the province is working on their new provincial policy statement, and it's due to be released around Christmas time. And there has been talk about dealing with residential uses in and around industrial areas. So I think what you're going to see is enabling policies come from the province that allow for those types of residential uses in industrial areas where there's not going to be any risk to human health or safety. So for example, you can't put a high-rise building right next to a propane storage tank facility, that kind of thing. So, but stay tuned. I think you'll see some more enabling policy come out of the province closer to Christmas.
I also heard a rumor that the province have increased the ability to build the square footage requirements for building without benefit of a permit. that it was, I think, 100 or 106 square feet, and now it's 160. Is that?
Yes, that's right. You'll find now that is, you're absolutely correct. It was 102 square feet. Now it's 160. So that's been around a bit, because I know myself, looking at trying to build a shed here in my backyard, I was quite excited to go to 160 feet. But again, that sort of gets borne out in the local regulations in terms of zoning. I know in our municipality here, you're actually allowed to have two buildings, two accessory buildings on your property, as long as the total doesn't go over 160 square meters. So that, again, that's how they've written their bylaw. So
Square feet, you mean? Or
yeah, that's right. Sorry, square feet.
So I'm just wondering about, and back to the tiny houses
Mhm.
that you see, in some instances, they're two-tiered. Quite often they've got a loft or sleeping area up above, that some are actually or could be in and around 160 square feet on the main floor.
Mhm.
Pretty small, but it is being done. So I just kind of wonder how that's all going to fit together. Anyway, that's not necessarily an issue for the land division. Any questions or comments about the proposed changes to the official plan? I see that that's on our agenda for Wednesday at the county. So we would just receive that report?
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah. Okay, our next committee meeting is scheduled for September the 11th. Any issues with that? Hearing none. Member McKelvey.
No problem with that. I do have another question I wanted to ask about something else, if I may.
Oh, absolutely. Go ahead.
And I meant to bring it up back when we had a couple of the Dysart consent applications. We're putting in a reference in the notes regarding the shoreline tree preservation bylaw, but that doesn't apply to Dysart. So I don't know if the notes need to be tailored so it's different for them, or how that should happen.
Madam Chair, yeah, what we'll do going forward is I'll amend that note for the Dysart applications. The county's tree cutting bylaw still applies, so I can make that amendment to the bylaw number.
That's fine. Thank you.
Thank you. Bob.
Thank you. I don't have a problem with the September meeting. I may be away in November. And just wondering whether I should be notifying Highlands East and asking for a replacement, or whether just be absent.
I think as long as we have a quorum, you're allowed to be absent. We wouldn't appoint somebody for a single meeting.
Okay.
Hopefully I'm correct in that, gentlemen. Okay.
Okay, super. Thank you.
Tammy.
Well, I guess it probably depends on how they did it. I mean, at our township, they appointed me, but they also appointed an alternate. So I don't know if
Yeah,
Highlands
no.
East.
Oh yeah, that's right. They do.
There's no alternate appointed.
I've forgotten about the alternates. Okay, if there are no more questions, could I have a mover and a seconder to adjourn? Member McKelvey, Member Donald.
Be it resolved that the August 14th, 2023 Land Division Committee meeting be hereby adjourned at 7:53 p.m.
All in favor? That's carried. Thanks very
Thank you.
much, everyone.
Thanks. Good meeting.
Thank you.
Have a good rest of the evening.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.
Thank you.